Hello and thank you for joining me again as we continue our discussion on the integumentary system. So today we're going to talk about the epidermis and the dermis. So at the end of this video, you'll be able to label or list the 5 layers of the epidermis. You'll be able to use trademark features to categorize each layer, to identify each layer, and then you'll be able to tell me the difference between what thick skin and thin skin is. So people say thick skin and thin skin, people tell me exactly what the difference is between those two. So for starters, we have what's called your epidermis. Epidermis is avascular, meaning there's not a blood supply to it. It's keratinized, being covered in keratin, which is hardened, dead and hardened essentially. The thickest layers of your epidermis are found on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. And so those range from 0.8 to 1.4 millimeters in thickness. Your epidermis is composed of melanocytes, which provide melanin, and that provides us our skin color. It allows us to tan. And then they're made of what are known as stratified squamous epithelia. So squamous is the simple cells, stratified being in layers. So instead of being a flat sheet, they're stacked on top of one another. Thin skin. So epidermis, again, we have thin skin, we have thick skin. Thin skin covers most of your body. So everything outside of the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet is thin skin. Your thin skin is made of 4 layers of keratinocytes. Your thick skin is made of 5 layers of keratinocytes, and you will be able to label all 4 of these and all 5 of those. We'll talk about the differences here. These are your 5 layers. So from most deep to most superficial, we have your stratum basale, your stratum spinosum, your stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum. And so to remember those from outside to in, one of my groups came up with cats love grandma's smelly basement. So that helps you out. That's how you can remember the layers of your epidermis. And we're going to talk about each of these individually here shortly. So to start with, we have your stratum corneum. This is your most superficial layer. This is also known as the horn layer. It's tough. It's your outermost layer, composed of dead cells. They're not dividing anymore. They are dead. They're waiting to be shed off, essentially. So 15 to 30 layers of cells covered in keratin, which is that hardened substance. This is a water-resistant layer, which prevents water from getting in and out. Not completely, but does a decent job. It's shed and replaced every 2 weeks. So these are the cells that fall off, are lost. If they didn't, you would become super thick and would eventually not be able to move because you had so many layers of skin sticking out from you. So it's a good thing that they shed and fall off. Below that is your stratum lucidum. Lucid, referring to a clearish appearance. So this is the clear layer. This is the one that's only found in thick skin. So you only find the stratum lucidum in the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. And then this is on the outside of your stratum granulosum. So this is where it starts to clear up. Here is your stratum lucidum. You see a little bit of difference here in these cells. So that is your stratum lucidum. Beneath that, we have your stratum granulosum. This is where cells actually stop dividing. This is when they stop dividing and begin to die. But you will notice that the granulosum, you can see these keratin granules or keratohyalin granules. And you notice those. That's a trademark of this specific layer, is you see these granules here in the middle. That's where the name granulosum comes from. This is when cells begin to keratinize, which is the production of a fibrous protein. Very similar to your hair and nails, but makes your cells harder and thicker. Beneath that, you have your stratum spinosum. This is the spiny layer. So spinos and spiny come together. Your stratum spinosum here, the spines extend down this way, is where that term comes from and where that name comes from. So this is produced by, as your stratum basale divides, you get your stratum spinosum. 8 to 10 layers bound by desmosomes, and then shells shrink until the cytoskeletons stick out, and that's where the spines come from as well. So the cells themselves are spiny. It also is a spiny layer there. But the cytoskeleton makes the cells look kind of pokey. That's where the spinosum comes from. The last one is your stratum basale. This is your germinative layer, meaning it's dividing. So many stem cells here, known as basal cells. They're attached to your basal lamina, which is that basement lining. They bond the epidermis to the dermis. So this is where your epidermis and your dermis meet. We have epidermal ridges going down and dermal papillae coming up, which we'll talk about. So this is, your stratum basale is your epidermal ridges coming down. So these are those, I talked about spines on the last one. That's actually these guys, which are coming down. So these are your epidermal ridges. And then on the bottom, you have your dermal papillae. Papillae is like bumps. So on the bottom side, the white part here, these are the bumps you have coming up. And this creates kind of an interlocking system that holds your epidermis to your dermis, which strengthens the attachment. There's a condition in horses where they don't have this connection take place, and so the skin on a horse actually slides around, which is not a good condition to have. And you can actually tear the skin right off the horse because this connection is not there. There's no bond. Okay, real quick, what are the 5 layers of the epidermis? What characterizes cells in the stratum lucidum? What happens to cells in the stratum granulosum? And then which of these layers is the thickest? So answer those questions, pause the video, answer those, and then hit play again. We'll talk about the dermis, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. Your dermis is beneath your epidermis. So epi means above. So epi means above the dermis. Epidermis is above the dermis. Your dermis contains lymphatics, nerves, nerve endings, blood vessels, sebaceous and sweat glands, which we'll talk about, elastic fibers as well, along with hair follicles. So dermis contains all the structures of the skin. The things that we know and see, the accessory structures are all found here. There are 2 layers to your dermis. One, you have the papillary layer, which is where you get your ridges at. So your papillary layer is your dermal papillae. This creates your fingerprints, your footprints. Those are all created from these ridges here. So no 2 people's dermises are the same. You have different dermal papillae, different lines which create different fingerprints. Your reticular layer, which is the lower layer, is made of white fibrous tissue that supports blood vessels. So up here would be your papillary layer, and then down beneath that is your reticular layer. So of the 2, your reticular is much larger, much bigger, but it supports blood vessels and different structures within your skin. That's known as your reticular layer. Functions of the dermis. The dermis supports, nourishes, insulates, and cushions the skin. It connects your underlying tissues. It connects to your underlying tissue by your subcutaneous layer, which is down here. And again, that's your fatty areolar tissue there. But that is your dermis. So in review, I would like to know the function of the dermis. There are 2 layers. What are they? How are those 2 layers different? What causes your fingerprints? And what is the function of dermal papillae? Make sure you can answer those. If you have questions, again, please ask. Otherwise, I look forward to continuing our discussion on the skin and the integumentary system with you, and I will see you next time.